Sarah Martinez had always dreamed of serving her country. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she watched her grandfather's military photos with wide eyes, listening to stories of honor, duty, and sacrifice. When she turned 18, she enlisted in the Navy without hesitation, her heart filled with pride and determination to make a difference. Boot camp was challenging, but Sarah thrived under pressure. She excelled in physical training, earned top marks in academics, and demonstrated natural leadership qualities that impressed her instructors. Her fellow recruits respected her dedication and positive attitude, even during the most grueling exercises. Sarah's dream was to eventually qualify for specialized training, possibly even attempting the rigorous path toward becoming a Navy SEAL, though she knew the odds were against her as a woman in a traditionally male-dominated field. After completing basic training, Sarah was assigned to Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia. She was excited about her first real assignment and looked forward to proving herself in her new role as a communications specialist. The base was massive, housing thousands of personnel, and Sarah felt both nervous and thrilled to be part of such an important military installation. During her first week at Norfolk, Sarah noticed the clear hierarchy and unspoken rules that governed daily life on base. Most of the senior personnel were welcoming and professional, but she quickly identified a group of male sailors who seemed less than enthusiastic about having women in their ranks. This group was led by Petty Officer First Class Derek Coleman, a man in his early 30s with 12 years of service under his belt. Coleman had a reputation for being tough and uncompromising, but Sarah soon realized his attitude toward female sailors crossed the line into harassment. He would make snide comments about women not belonging in combat roles, question their physical capabilities, and create an uncomfortable atmosphere whenever women were present during training exercises or briefings. The first direct confrontation occurred during a routine equipment inspection. Sarah had prepared meticulously, ensuring every piece of her gear was spotless and properly maintained. When Coleman approached her station, he barely glanced at her equipment before shaking his head dismissively. "This is what happens when we lower standards," he muttered loud enough for nearby sailors to hear. "Back in my day, real sailors took pride in their appearance and equipment." Sarah felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger, but she maintained her composure. "Petty Officer Coleman, sir, I believe my equipment meets all required standards. Would you like to inspect it more thoroughly?" Coleman's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, clearly annoyed by her respectful but firm response. "Are you questioning my judgment, recruit?" "No, sir. I'm simply requesting clarification on any deficiencies you've identified so I can correct them immediately." Several other sailors had stopped their work to watch the exchange, creating an uncomfortable tension in the room. Coleman seemed to realize he was losing face and decided to escalate the situation rather than back down gracefully. "Your attitude needs adjustment, Martinez. Maybe you should consider whether you're really cut out for military service. This isn't summer camp." The comment stung because Sarah had worked twice as hard as most of her male counterparts to prove herself worthy of wearing the uniform. She had sacrificed social relationships, pushed her body to its limits, and dedicated every waking moment to becoming the best sailor she could be. To have her commitment questioned by someone who was supposed to be her superior was both infuriating and heartbreaking. Over the following weeks, Coleman's harassment intensified. He would assign Sarah to the most unpleasant duties, criticize her work regardless of its quality, and make inappropriate comments about her appearance and abilities. Other female sailors confided in Sarah that they had experienced similar treatment, but most were too afraid to report it formally for fear of retaliation or being labeled as troublemakers. Sarah tried to handle the situation through proper channels, first approaching her immediate supervisor and then requesting a meeting with the base chaplain. However, Coleman had been careful to conduct most of his harassment without witnesses, and his 12 years of service gave him credibility that Sarah's few months couldn't match. The responses she received were sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful, with suggestions to tough it out and prove yourself through actions, not complaints. The situation reached a breaking point during a particularly stressful week when Sarah's unit was preparing for an important inspection by visiting admirals. The entire base was on high alert, with everyone working long hours to ensure everything met the Navy's exacting standards. Sarah had been working 16-hour days, checking and rechecking communication equipment, updating technical manuals, and coordinating with other departments to ensure seamless operations. On the morning of the inspection, Sarah arrived early to make final preparations. She was proud of the work her team had accomplished and confident that they would receive high marks from the visiting officers. As she entered the communication center, she immediately noticed something was wrong. Her carefully organized workspace had been disturbed, and several important technical manuals were missing from their designated locations. Panic set in as Sarah frantically searched for the missing materials. The inspection was scheduled to begin in less than 2 hours, and these documents were essential for demonstrating proper procedures to the visiting admirals. She quickly realized that the manuals hadn't simply been misplaced, they had been deliberately hidden or removed. As Sarah continued her desperate search, she heard familiar laughter coming from the storage room adjacent to her workspace. Through the partially open door, she could see Coleman and 2 of his closest associates examining what appeared to be her missing technical manuals. The men were making jokes about teaching the girl a lesson and speculating about how embarrassed she would be when the admirals discovered her apparent lack of preparation. The realization that her own colleagues had sabotaged her work was devastating. Sarah felt a mixture of rage, betrayal, and deep sadness that fellow service members would deliberately undermine her success. She understood that this wasn't just about her. Coleman was sending a message to all the women on base that they would never be truly accepted or supported by their male counterparts. In that moment, Sarah faced a crucial decision. She could confront Coleman directly, potentially escalating the conflict and risking her career. She could attempt to retrieve the manuals and pretend nothing had happened, essentially allowing the harassment to continue. Or she could find another way to handle the situation that would protect both her integrity and her future in the Navy. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her thoughts as the inspection team began their rounds earlier than expected. Sarah quickly composed herself and prepared to face whatever consequences Coleman's sabotage might bring, knowing that this incident would likely define her entire military career. The inspection proceeded as badly as Sarah had feared. When Admiral Richardson and his team arrived at the communications center, they immediately noticed the absence of the required technical manuals and the apparent disorganization of Sarah's workspace. Despite her best efforts to explain the situation professionally, the visiting officers were clearly disappointed with what they perceived as poor preparation and lack of attention to detail. Coleman, who had conveniently positioned himself nearby during the inspection, expressed mock surprise at the missing materials and made subtle comments about the importance of thorough preparation. His performance was convincing enough that the inspecting officers began questioning Sarah's competence and reliability as a communications specialist. Sailor Martinez, Admiral Richardson said sternly, "These technical manuals are fundamental to your role. Their absence suggests a serious lack of preparedness that reflects poorly on your entire unit." Sarah felt her career aspirations crumbling as she tried to maintain her composure. "Sir, I take full responsibility for the situation. I will ensure that all materials are properly accounted for and organized according to Navy standards." The Admiral made notes on his evaluation form before moving to the next station, leaving Sarah to face the disappointed expressions of her commanding officers. She knew that this incident would likely result in a negative performance review and could potentially derail her hopes for advancement or specialized training opportunities. After the inspection team departed, Sarah's immediate supervisor, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, called her into his office for what she knew would be a difficult conversation. Hayes was generally fair and supportive, but he was also under significant pressure to maintain high standards and couldn't afford to appear lenient with personnel who failed to meet expectations. "Martinez, I'm extremely disappointed in today's performance," Hayes began, his tone more sorrowful than angry. "You've shown great promise since arriving at this base, but this kind of oversight is simply unacceptable. I'm going to have to recommend formal counseling and place a letter of reprimand in your personnel file." Sarah desperately wanted to explain what had really happened, but she knew that accusations without proof would only make her situation worse. Coleman had been clever enough to ensure that there were no witnesses to his sabotage, and any attempt to blame him would likely be dismissed as an excuse for her own failures. "I understand, sir. I accept full responsibility for the incident and will work to regain your confidence in my abilities." Hayes studied her carefully, perhaps sensing that there was more to the story than Sarah was revealing. "Is there anything else you need to tell me about what happened today?" For a moment, Sarah considered telling him everything about Coleman's harassment and the sabotage, but she realized that without evidence, such accusations would likely end her career even more quickly than accepting blame for the inspection failure. "No, sir. I simply need to do better in the future." The formal reprimand was devastating for Sarah's morale, but Coleman's reaction was even worse. He seemed energized by his successful sabotage and began escalating his harassment to new levels. He would bump into Sarah in crowded hallways, make inappropriate comments about her body during physical training, and openly question her qualifications in front of junior personnel. The other female sailors on base began avoiding Sarah, either out of fear that they would become targets themselves or because they believed the rumors Coleman was spreading about her incompetence and unreliability. Sarah found herself increasingly isolated, spending most of her free time alone in her quarters, questioning whether she had made a terrible mistake by joining the Navy. The harassment reached its peak during a particularly humiliating incident in the base mess hall. Sarah was eating lunch alone when Coleman and his associates sat down at a nearby table and began making loud comments clearly intended for her to hear. "Some people just aren't cut out for military service," Coleman said, speaking loudly enough that most of the mess hall could hear. "They think they can waltz in here and demand respect without earning it the hard way like the rest of us." His friend, Petty Officer Second Class Jake Morrison, laughed and added, "Maybe they should stick to jobs that don't require real responsibility. I hear the civilian world has plenty of opportunities for people who can't handle the pressure." Sarah tried to ignore the comments and focus on her meal, but the humiliation was overwhelming. She could feel dozens of eyes watching her, some with sympathy but many with the kind of cruel curiosity that accompanies public embarrassment. When she finally stood to leave, Coleman called out one final insult. "Running away again, Martinez? That seems to be your specialty." The comment drew laughter from several tables, and Sarah felt tears threatening to spill as she quickly walked toward the exit. Just as she reached the door, she collided with someone entering the mess hall and nearly lost her balance. "Whoa there, sailor. You okay?" Sarah looked up to see a tall man with piercing blue eyes and the kind of calm confidence that immediately commanded respect. He was wearing the uniform of a Navy SEAL, with the distinctive trident insignia prominently displayed on his chest. Something about his presence seemed to change the entire atmosphere of the mess hall, as conversations quieted and people straightened their posture instinctively. "I'm fine, sir. Sorry for bumping into you." The SEAL studied her face carefully, clearly noticing her distress despite her attempts to maintain composure. "You sure about that? You look like someone just told you the chow here was actually edible." His joke was gentle and kind, delivered with a slight smile that suggested genuine concern rather than mockery. Sarah managed a weak smile in return, grateful for the first friendly interaction she'd had in weeks. "It's nothing I can't handle, sir." The SEAL's expression grew more serious as he glanced toward Coleman's table, where the harassment had originated. "Mind if I ask what's got you looking like you're ready to request a transfer to the Arctic?" Sarah hesitated, unsure whether she should confide in someone she'd just met, even if he was clearly a respected senior service member. Something about his demeanor suggested that he was genuinely concerned and might actually be able to help, but she had been disappointed too many times to trust easily. "Just the usual challenges of military life, sir. Nothing worth bothering you with." The SEAL nodded thoughtfully, but Sarah could tell that he wasn't entirely convinced by her explanation. "Well, if those usual challenges ever become more than you can handle alone, feel free to find me. Name's Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson. I'm usually around the training facilities or the SEAL compound." As Chief Thompson moved past her into the mess hall, Sarah noticed that the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Coleman and his associates had stopped their loud conversation and were suddenly very interested in their food. Other sailors who had been laughing at Sarah's expense were now sitting quietly, as if they sensed that something important had just occurred. Sarah didn't think much about the encounter until later that evening when she was approached by Petty Officer Linda Chen, one of the few female sailors who hadn't completely distanced herself from Sarah since the inspection incident. "Hey, Sarah. I heard you met Chief Thompson today. That's pretty cool, he's kind of a legend around here. Sarah looked up from the technical manual she was studying, grateful for any friendly conversation. He seemed nice enough. Why is he a legend? Linda sat down beside her, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Chief Thompson is one of the most decorated SEALs on the base. He's been on more missions than anyone can count, and he's saved the lives of dozens of service members. But what makes him really special is how he treats people. He doesn't tolerate bullying or harassment, and he's got a reputation for standing up for sailors who are being treated unfairly. The information sparked a glimmer of hope in Sarah's heart, but she tried not to get her expectations too high. That's good to know, but I'm not sure how it helps my situation. Linda smiled knowingly. Let's just say that Chief Thompson has a way of making problems disappear. And, from what I heard, he seemed pretty interested in whatever was bothering you in the mess hall today. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about her brief encounter with Chief Thompson and wondering whether she should take him up on his offer to help. Part of her wanted to handle the situation on her own, to prove that she was strong enough to overcome Coleman's harassment without assistance. But another part of her realized that the situation was spiraling out of control and that she might need an ally if she wanted to salvage her military career. The decision was made for her the following morning when she discovered that someone had broken into her locker and destroyed several of her personal belongings. Her family photos had been torn up, her civilian clothes had been cut with what appeared to be scissors or a knife, and someone had written crude, sexist graffiti on the inside of her locker door. Standing there looking at the destruction of her most precious possessions, Sarah realized that Coleman's harassment had crossed a line from professional intimidation into personal assault. This wasn't just about questioning her military capabilities anymore, this was about trying to drive her out of the service entirely through psychological warfare. As she stared at the ruins of her torn family photos, Sarah felt something change inside her. The sadness and self-doubt that had been consuming her for weeks suddenly transformed into cold, determined anger. She was tired of being a victim, tired of accepting abuse, and tired of letting bullies destroy her dreams. It was time to find Chief Thompson and see if his reputation for helping sailors in trouble was as well-deserved as everyone claimed. Finding Chief Thompson proved easier than Sarah had expected. When she arrived at the SEAL training compound early the next morning, she was directed to an outdoor obstacle course where Thompson was conducting a training session with a group of SEAL candidates. She watched from a respectful distance as he put the trainees through a grueling series of exercises, noting his calm authority and the obvious respect his students had for him. When the training session concluded, Thompson noticed Sarah waiting nearby and approached her with the same concerned expression she remembered from their brief encounter in the mess hall. "Sailor Martinez, right? You look like you've got something on your mind." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that this conversation could either be the beginning of a solution to her problems or another disappointment in a long series of failed attempts to find help. "Chief Thompson, I wanted to take you up on your offer to listen if I ever needed someone to talk to. I think I'm in over my head with the situation, and I'm not sure how to handle it anymore." Thompson's expression grew more serious as he gestured toward a nearby bench where they could sit and talk privately. "Why don't you tell me what's been going on?" For the first time in months, Sarah felt safe enough to tell someone the complete truth about her situation. She described Coleman's escalating harassment, the sabotage of the inspection, the isolation from her fellow sailors, and, finally, the destruction of her personal belongings. Thompson listened intently without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly just allowing her to share her story. When Sarah finished speaking, Thompson was quiet for several moments, his jaw clenched in obvious anger. Finally, he looked directly at her and spoke with quiet intensity. "Sarah, what you've described isn't just unprofessional behavior, it's criminal harassment and destruction of property. More importantly, it's exactly the kind of toxic leadership that weakens our entire military. I want you to know that none of this is your fault, and you don't have to handle it alone anymore." The relief Sarah felt at having someone believe her story and take it seriously was overwhelming. For weeks, she had begun to doubt her own perceptions and wonder if she was overreacting to what others might consider normal military hazing. "What do you think I should do, Chief? I've tried going through proper channels, but Coleman is careful to avoid witnesses, and my word against his doesn't carry much weight." Thompson smiled grimly. That's where experience comes in handy. I've dealt with bullies like Coleman before, and I've learned that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. But we're going to do this the right way. We're going to gather evidence, document everything, and build a case that will not only stop his harassment but ensure he faces appropriate consequences. Over the next few days, Thompson worked behind the scenes to investigate Coleman's behavior and gather information from other sailors who had witnessed or experienced similar harassment. His reputation and connections throughout the base gave him access to information that Sarah never could have obtained on her own. Thompson discovered that Coleman had a history of complaints filed against him by female sailors, but these complaints had been handled at low levels and hadn't resulted in serious consequences. More importantly, he found evidence that Coleman's harassment wasn't limited to Sarah. Several other women had been targets of similar behavior, but fear of retaliation had kept them from speaking out publicly. The breakthrough came when Thompson learned about a hidden camera system that had recently been installed in the base's common areas as part of a security upgrade. The cameras had recorded several incidents of Coleman's harassment, including his loud comments in the mess hall and his suspicious behavior around Sarah's workspace on the day of the inspection. Armed with video evidence and testimony from multiple witnesses, Thompson arranged a meeting with the base's commanding officer, Captain Rebecca Walsh. Walsh was a respected leader who had broken through numerous barriers during her own career and had zero tolerance for the kind of behavior Thompson described. Chief Thompson, Walsh said after reviewing the evidence, this is exactly the kind of toxic behavior that undermines everything we're trying to accomplish in today's Navy. I want to thank you for bringing this to my attention and for supporting Sailor Martinez through this difficult situation. The meeting resulted in immediate action. Coleman was relieved of his duties pending a formal investigation, and the other sailors who had participated in the harassment were also disciplined. More importantly for Sarah, her personnel file was reviewed and the letter of reprimand was removed when the investigation revealed that the inspection failure had been the result of deliberate sabotage. But Thompson wasn't satisfied with simply addressing the immediate problem. He knew that Sarah's confidence and trust in the system had been severely damaged, and he was determined to help her rebuild both her career and her faith in the Navy's ability to protect its personnel. Sarah, he told her after the disciplinary actions had been announced, you've been through something that would have broken a lot of people. The fact that you kept trying to do your job and maintained your integrity throughout this ordeal tells me that you've got the kind of character the Navy needs in its leaders. Thompson arranged for Sarah to be transferred to a different department where she could work with supportive colleagues and rebuild her confidence. He also recommended her for advanced training opportunities, including a communications specialist course that would enhance her technical skills and improve her chances for promotion. The impact of Thompson's intervention extended far beyond Sarah's individual situation. Word of Coleman's dismissal and the circumstances surrounding it spread quickly throughout the base, sending a clear message that harassment and discrimination would not be tolerated. Several other female sailors who had been suffering in silence came forward with their own stories, leading to additional investigations and disciplinary actions. Thompson also used the incident as a teaching moment for the SEAL candidates under his supervision. During a leadership seminar, he discussed the importance of protecting fellow service members and the responsibility that comes with military rank and authority. Real strength isn't about how much weight you can lift or how fast you can run, he told the candidates. Real strength is about standing up for people who can't defend themselves and using your position to make the military a better place for everyone who serves. The lesson resonated deeply with the young sailors, many of whom had never considered the perspective of female service members or the unique challenges they faced in a male-dominated environment. Thompson's willingness to intervene on Sarah's behalf became a model for the kind of leadership he expected from future SEALs. For Sarah, the experience was transformative in ways she hadn't expected. While the harassment had been traumatic and damaging, Thompson's support and intervention had restored her faith in the military's core values and shown her what true leadership looked like. Chief Thompson, she said to him several weeks after Coleman's dismissal, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You saved my career and probably my entire future in the Navy. Thompson smiled and shook his head. Sarah, you saved your own career by having the courage to speak up and the integrity to keep doing your job even when things got tough. I just provided a little backup when you needed it most. The conversation took place outside the communications center where Sarah was now thriving in her new role. Her confidence had returned, and she was once again the dedicated, enthusiastic sailor who had impressed her instructors in boot camp. More importantly, she had become an advocate for other women facing similar challenges, offering support and guidance to anyone who found themselves in difficult situations. Thompson watched with pride as Sarah walked back into the communications center, knowing that she would continue to grow and succeed in her military career. But he also knew that her story was far from over, and that the lessons learned from this experience would shape both of their futures in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The base itself had changed as well. The swift and decisive action taken against Coleman and his associates had created a new atmosphere of accountability and respect. Female sailors reported feeling safer and more supported, while male sailors understood that their behavior toward colleagues would be held to the highest standards. Captain Walsh made sure that the lessons from Sarah's case were incorporated into the base's leadership training programs, ensuring that future incidents would be prevented rather than simply addressed after the fact. The changes weren't just policy adjustments, they represented a fundamental shift in the culture and values of the entire installation. As Sarah settled into her new role and began to excel once again, she often thought about the moment when she had collided with Chief Thompson outside the mess hall. That chance encounter had changed the trajectory of her entire military career and taught her that even in the darkest moments, there were people willing to stand up for what was right. 6 months after Coleman's dismissal, Sarah had not only recovered from her ordeal but had emerged as one of the most respected communications specialists on the base. Her technical skills had improved dramatically thanks to the advanced training Thompson had recommended, and her experience with harassment had given her a unique perspective that made her an effective mentor for other sailors facing similar challenges. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal as well. Sarah had developed a quiet confidence and inner strength that came from having survived a serious test of her character and principles. She no longer doubted her place in the Navy or questioned whether she belonged among the ranks of dedicated service members. Thompson had continued to check on Sarah's progress, not out of obligation but because he genuinely cared about her development as both a sailor and a person. Their relationship had evolved from mentor and student to colleagues who shared a mutual respect and understanding of what military service truly meant. "You know," Thompson said to Sarah during one of their periodic conversations, "I've been thinking about recommending you for the Chief Petty Officer Advancement exam. Your technical scores are excellent, your leadership potential is obvious, and you've shown the kind of moral courage that we need in our senior enlisted ranks." Sarah was stunned by the suggestion. The idea of becoming a Chief Petty Officer had always been a long-term goal, but she hadn't expected to be considered for advancement so soon after the Coleman incident. "Chief, I appreciate your confidence in me, but are you sure I'm ready for that level of responsibility? It wasn't that long ago that I was struggling just to survive day-to-day harassment." Thompson's expression grew serious as he considered his response. "Sarah, the fact that you can acknowledge your past struggles while also recognizing your growth shows exactly the kind of self-awareness we need in our leaders. The Navy isn't looking for people who've never faced adversity, we need people who've been tested and proven they can overcome challenges while maintaining their integrity." The conversation planted a seed in Sarah's mind that continued to grow over the following weeks. She began to see her experience with Coleman not as a traumatic setback but as a crucible that had forged her into a stronger and more capable leader. The harassment had taught her empathy for others facing similar challenges, while Thompson's intervention had shown her what effective leadership looked like in practice. When the advancement exam results were announced 3 months later, Sarah's name was at the top of the list. Her promotion to Chief Petty Officer came with new responsibilities and opportunities that she embraced with enthusiasm and determination. But perhaps the most significant change came when Sarah was asked to speak at the base's annual leadership conference. Captain Walsh had invited her to share her story as part of a panel discussion on creating inclusive and supportive military environments. Standing at the podium before an audience of several hundred service members, Sarah felt nervous but determined to use her experience to help others. She told her story honestly and completely, describing both the devastating impact of harassment and the transformative power of effective leadership intervention. "I'm not here to villainize anyone or to suggest that our military is fundamentally flawed," she said to the attentive audience. I'm here because I believe that every single person in this room has the power to make our Navy better. Whether you're a junior enlisted sailor or a senior officer, you have the ability to either contribute to problems or help solve them. The response to her presentation was overwhelmingly positive. Dozens of service members approached her afterward to share their own experiences and ask for advice. Several female sailors told her that her story had given them the courage to report harassment they had been enduring in silence, while male sailors expressed appreciation for her perspective on issues they hadn't previously understood. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. A young male sailor named Petty Officer 3rd Class Michael Rodriguez approached Sarah after her presentation with obvious nervousness. "Chief Martinez," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I wanted to apologize for something. I was one of the sailors laughing in the mess hall when Coleman was making those comments about you. I didn't participate in the harassment, but I didn't do anything to stop it either. Your presentation made me realize that my silence was part of the problem." Sarah was moved by his honesty and courage in acknowledging his mistake. Petty Officer Rodriguez, it takes real character to admit when you've fallen short of your own standards. The fact that you're here talking to me about it shows that you're already becoming the kind of sailor our Navy needs. Rodriguez nodded gratefully and, then, surprised Sarah with an additional comment. "Chief, I wanted you to know that your story has changed how I think about leadership and responsibility. I've decided to apply for the Naval Academy Prep program because I want to become the kind of officer who stands up for people like Chief Thompson did for you." The conversation reminded Sarah that her ordeal had ripple effects that extended far beyond her own career. By sharing her story and demonstrating resilience in the face of adversity, she was inspiring others to become better versions of themselves. Thompson, who had watched Sarah's presentation from the back of the auditorium, approached her afterward with obvious pride in his expression. "Chief Martinez," he said, using her new rank with a smile, "that was one of the most powerful speeches I've ever heard. You've taken something terrible that happened to you and transformed it into a force for positive change. That's what real leadership looks like." Sarah felt tears threatening to spill as she responded. "Chief Thompson, everything I've learned about leadership, I learned by watching you. You showed me that true strength comes from protecting others and using your position to make things better, not easier for yourself." The relationship between Sarah and Thompson had come full circle. What had begun as a rescue mission had evolved into a mentorship that was transforming both of their perspectives on military service and leadership. A year later, Sarah received news that would have seemed impossible during her darkest moments under Coleman's harassment. She had been selected for officer candidate school, the first step toward becoming a commissioned officer in the Navy. The selection was based not only on her technical competence and leadership potential but also on her demonstrated ability to overcome adversity and advocate for positive change. Thompson was among the first to congratulate her on the selection, but their conversation revealed that he had his own significant news to share. "Sarah, I've been selected for a new assignment that I think you'll find interesting. I'm going to be heading up a Navy-wide initiative to prevent harassment and discrimination. Your story and the way you've handled everything since then has been one of the inspirations for this program." The announcement filled Sarah with pride and satisfaction. Knowing that her experience had contributed to systemic changes that would protect future sailors gave meaning to all the pain and struggle she had endured. "Chief, that's incredible news. I know you'll make a real difference in that role. Is there anything I can do to support the initiative?" Thompson smiled. "Actually, I was hoping you might be interested in helping develop the training curriculum once you complete OCS. We need people who understand both the problem and the solution from personal experience." The offer represented the perfect convergence of Sarah's professional goals and her desire to prevent others from experiencing what she had endured. Working with Thompson to create training programs that would protect vulnerable service members while holding leaders accountable felt like the ideal way to use her experience constructively. As they discussed the possibilities for future collaboration, both Sarah and Thompson reflected on how much had changed since the chance encounter outside the mess hall. What had begun as a crisis had evolved into an opportunity for growth, learning, and positive change that extended far beyond either of their individual careers. Sarah's story had become more than just a tale of harassment and intervention. It had become a model for resilience, the power of effective mentorship, and the importance of transforming personal adversity into a force for positive change. Her journey from victim to leader demonstrated that even the most difficult experiences could become sources of strength and wisdom when faced with courage and supported by principled leadership. The young woman who had once felt alone and powerless in the face of systematic harassment had become Chief Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, a respected leader whose story continued to inspire others throughout the Navy. And the SEAL who had simply tried to help a struggling sailor had found his own calling in creating systemic changes that would protect future generations of service members. Their partnership represented the best of what military service could offer, the opportunity to serve something greater than oneself while supporting fellow service members through the challenges and triumphs of military life. Together, they had proven that one person's willingness to intervene could create ripple effects that transformed entire organizations and inspired countless others to stand up for what was right.